Today on Variant, I give you the history of Captain Marvel. Welcome to Variant, where we love comics more than this past week's episode of Game of Thrones had one of the best battle scenes in all of TV and movie history. I'm your host, Arris. As mostly every comic fan knows, Marvel's Civil War II series kicked off about a few weeks ago. It's 2 issues in at the time of me shooting this video, and I've been really enjoying it thus far. And since Captain Marvel is such a big part of the series, I think this is a perfect time to talk about Captain Marvel's history. Now, there's been several different characters that take on the mantle of Captain Marvel over the years, but today I'm only going to be focusing on Carol Danvers, since she's the current Captain Marvel, and as I said, she's one of the main characters in Civil War II. She is also the Captain Marvel that is set to get her very own Marvel Studios movie. But before I get into that, I just wanted to let you guys know that Variant is now on Instagram. Yes, we are stretching our social media legs and will be posting a lot of new content over the coming months, including occasional previews of coming episodes and my favorite comic book of the week. So for those of you who don't know, you can find us on Instagram at variant_official, where you can click, follow, and be our friend. There will be digital hugs aplenty. With that said, let's do this dang thing. Now, before I start talking about Carol Danvers, some of you might be saying I always wondered what was up with DC and Marvel Comics both having a character called Captain Marvel. Because as we all know, DC has Shazam / Captain Marvel. Well, DC's Captain Marvel was originally a Fawcett's comic character, but DC Comics sued Fawcett Comics for breach in copyright because DC felt that Fawcett's Captain Marvel was way too similar to their Man of Steel. So Fawcett Comics had to stop publishing their Captain Marvel. But during the late 60s, Marvel was able to get their hands on the trademark Captain Marvel and eventually forced DC to name their Captain Marvel comic book Shazam when they obtained the rights to publish the former Fawcett hero in the early 70s. And that, my friends, is why we have 2 different Captain Marvels running around from the 2 biggest publishers in comic books. Although it's worth noting that DC's Captain Marvel is now officially called Shazam as of the New 52. I don't know if DC Rebirth is going to change that, but the last I heard, he was called Shazam. Anyway, with all that confusion out of the way, let's talk about Carol Danvers. She first appeared in Marvel Superheroes issue 13 in March of 1968, and as Captain Marvel in Captain Marvel issue 1 in 2012. She was originally created by writer Roy Thomas and artist Gene Colan, and was originally a supporting character for Captain Marvel's own title. After her creation, they realized that she had potential to eventually be a main character, so Roy Thomas and Archie Goodwin planted the seeds for what became Miss Marvel's superhero origin. When the mid-1970s rolled around, Marvel was all like, hey, we want a new powerful female superhero who can have her own title and who could represent the modern liberated woman. So in 1977, they gave Carol Danvers her superpowers and she officially became Miss Marvel. But let's go back to see how she became Miss Marvel, shall we? Carol Danvers was introduced as a very capable young woman who fought against gender typing in the United States Air Force and eventually became an officer. But if that's not impressive enough, she then became a CIA agent who got hired as the head of NASA security for Cape Canaveral. Another very important piece of info is that while at NASA, Carol worked with Dr. Philip Lawson, who was secretly an alien Kree agent called Mar-Vell, the first Captain Marvel. Flash forward a bit, during a battle with a Kree enemy, a device known as the Psych Magnetron exploded, and Captain Marvel shielded Carol from the radiation of the blast with his very own body. This caused Carol to absorb a crap ton of Mar-Vell's own genetic template, which made her DNA the perfect synthesis of Kree and human genes, making her a human-Kree hybrid. Kinda like Michael from the Underworld movies, who's a Lycan vampire hybrid. Come to think of it, it's not really the same thing at all. I just really wanted to reference Underworld. Anyway, after Carol recovered from the explosion, she gained superhuman powers and abilities, because what else is an explosion good for in comics if not to give you superpowers? I feel like if an explosion happens in comics and you don't get some kind of powers out of it, you're just extremely unlucky. But I digress. Later, she finds out her powers are very similar to those of Captain Marvel, so she puts on a costume and a mask, and bada bing bada boom, she became Miss Marvel. That's right, I totally just said bada bing bada boom. What of it? Miss Marvel's first self-titled series lasted 23 issues before it was cancelled, but she soon joined the Avengers and was on the team for quite a while, appearing in several issues. But the character would be put in limbo after Avengers 200 in 1980 because of controversy with the story. Why was there controversy? Well, that's because in the story, Miss Marvel is kidnapped by a character named Marcus. She is then brought to another dimension where she is brainwashed, seduced, and impregnated. That's right, this story implied rape, thus the controversy. By the end of the issue, we see that the child she gave birth to ages quickly into another version of Marcus, and for X, Y, and Z reasons, he can't stay on Earth. So he manipulated Miss Marvel to believe she loved him, and she went back with him to his home in Limbo. Sometime later, Carol Danvers finally escaped from Limbo, but Rogue stole her powers as well as her memory. But don't worry, Professor X eventually restored her memories, just not her powers, unfortunately. With no superpowers, she became the X-Men's #1 pilot and intelligence operative. Fighting alongside the X-Men led her to be captured by an alien race that accidentally unlocked the full potential of her power. She gained godlike power and became binary. But like everything in comics, that didn't last forever, and Carol lost her cosmic link with her binary powers after a fight in outer space. She then returned to Earth and changed her name to Warbird before joining the Avengers and forgiving them for letting her be taken to Limbo. For those of you wondering why she's had 2 different costumes, well, the one that's currently on the screen is her original costume, and this one is her signature one that she got after a battle that badly damaged her original costume. The battle briefly reunited Carol with her old boy toy, Captain Marvel. Now, I've spent all this time talking about her years as Miss Marvel when this history of is about Carol Danvers, Captain Marvel. But hey, you have to know where you've been to see where you're going. Plus, the majority of her history is as Miss Marvel. So now you know how she got all her powers and some of her ups and downs of her superhero career. But now let's see why and how she became Captain Marvel. Over the years, she became a major player in the Marvel Universe and even led the Mighty Avengers. So in 2012, it only seemed fitting that she would become the new Captain Marvel. It all happened after a fight with Absorbing Man in her new costume, when Captain America Steve Rogers suggested that Carol take on the mantle of Captain Marvel. He told her that the timing was good for a name change since she just got a new costume, but she was all like, heck no at first. But after thinking about it while flying around the Earth's atmosphere, Carol remembered Helen Cobb, a mentor and fellow pilot who had recently died. Helen had stressed the idea of being the best you can be and not to let anything hold you back. With that in mind, Carol chose to take on the mantle of Captain Marvel and honor the legacy of her old Creed boy toy, Marvel, and the rest is history. Most recently, at least at the time of me making this video, she can be found as one of the main players in Civil War II. The first time around, it was Captain America versus Iron Man, and now it's Captain Marvel versus Iron Man. Carol Danvers is all for changing the future, and Iron Man is about protecting the future. If you want a synopsis of Civil War II, go watch my review of issue 1. I put the link for that in the description. Since Carol became the new Captain Marvel, that left the Miss Marvel mantle open, and it was filled by Kamala Khan. She's a really cool character, so she might even get her own History of episode in the future. But now that I've talked about Carol Danvers as Miss Marvel, Binary, Warbird, and Captain Marvel, let's talk about her powers. She has super speed, super agility, super strength, flight, super stamina, invulnerability, energy projection, energy absorption, danger sense, which is kind of like a spider sense, regeneration, minor molecular control, cosmic awareness, and the list goes on. To sum it up, she's a BAMF who has cosmic power and is really, really strong. Now, before I close this segment out with some reading recommendations, I just want to let you guys know, as always, I realize I left out several parts of her history, but I tried to give you all a nice bite-sized summary of the character. As for good reading recommendations, you have Captain Marvel Volume 1, Higher, Further, Faster, More, Captain Marvel Volume 2, Stay Fly, Captain Marvel Volume 1, In Pursuit of Flight, Captain Marvel Volume 2, Down, and while this isn't Captain Marvel, it's still Carol Danvers, which is Miss Marvel Masterworks Volume 1. I think that's enough to get you guys started. E3 just finished last week and we got tons of video game announcements, but the game I'm mainly looking forward to is Injustice 2. Don't get me wrong, the new Spider-Man game looks really cool, even though I'm not digging the huge white spider on his costume, but the game still looks like a lot of fun, and I'll definitely be playing it. But Injustice 2 just did it for me, guys. I have to say, this game looks freaking awesome. It basically just looks like the first game, but more polished and with a bunch more upgrades and new characters. And that's all I could ever want, because the first game was fantastic in my opinion. I think adding the armor upgrades is a really cool idea. It's gonna make everyone's Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and so on extremely different, as there's so many different ways to customize each character. I've never been a huge fan of the costume designs for Injustice, but I will say the Injustice 2 costumes without all the armor on look way better than the designs for the first game. Also, Atrocitus and Gorilla Grodd confirmed? Yes, and thank you. All I'm saying is we need some Darkseid, Red Hood, Booster Gold, Deadshot, Bizarro, Black Canary, Dr. Fate, Swamp Thing, Reverse Flash, Constantine, Static Shock, Firestorm, Captain Cold, and even Icon in this game. Make this happen, Warner. Please make this happen. Also, the new finishers look ridiculous, like when Superman chucks Batman and then flies past him and catches him with one hand on the other side, or when Batman is shooting Superman in his Batwing, or my favorite, for what I've seen thus far, when Aquaman summons the ocean and lightning and then a sea monster fish thing to eat people. I want to play this game, like now. In summary, I hate that I have to wait till next year to play this game. First up for Wednesday, June 22nd, we have Miss Marvel issue 8. This is a Civil War II tie-in, and Kamala is called to the front lines of battle. Here we have The Flash issue 1. Just as Barry begins to feel overwhelmed fighting crime, a new speedster debuts. But where did he get his powers from? And finally, we have Aquaman issue 1. Black Manta returns. I think that's all I should have to say. And that brings another episode of Variant to a close. But remember, you can always like our Variant Facebook page to keep up with the show and all things comic related. You can also follow Variant on Twitter at Variant Comics or me on Twitter at Arris_Quinones. And if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe. So I'll see you guys next week when I talk about all things comics. She then became a CIA agent who got hired at Allah. Stole her powers as well as her memory. Her years as Miss Marvel when this history of is Let me at him, let me at him, let me at him. Why I oughta.